Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for more stories. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Michael Kincaid had built his life on precision. 24 years in military intelligence had taught him that information was power, and power required patience. At 41, his steel-gray eyes missed nothing. His mind cataloged everything, and his emotions remained locked behind a facade that had fooled enemies and allies alike. Had met Lauren McKay at a charity gala in Denver 9 years ago. She was 34 then, a stunning blonde with emerald eyes and a laugh that could light up a room. She worked in real estate, specializing in luxury properties, and had an infectious energy that drew people to her like moths to flame. Michael, recently retired from the military and establishing his private security consulting firm, found himself captivated by her warmth and apparent authenticity. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Lauren seemed genuinely interested in his work, his past, his dreams. She never pushed about the classified details of his military service, respecting the boundaries that had cost him previous relationships. Within 20 months, they were married in an elaborate ceremony that Lauren had orchestrated with a level of organization that would have impressed Michael's former commanding officers. The early years were good. Michael's business flourished as corporate clients saw his expertise in threat assessment and security protocols. Lauren's real estate career soared, her natural charisma and Michael's connections opening doors to high-end clientele. They bought a sprawling house in an upscale neighborhood called Greenwood Ridge Estates, complete with a home office that Michael had discreetly equipped with surveillance equipment, old habits from his intelligence days. Lauren had 2 children from her previous marriage, Haley, now 17, and Logan, 13. Michael had embraced his role as stepfather with the same dedication he brought to everything else. He attended their games, helped with homework, and provided the stability their biological father had never offered. The kids called him dad within a year, and Michael felt something he'd never experienced in all his years of service, a sense of home. But Michael's training had taught him that people always revealed their true nature eventually. The signs were subtle at first. Unexplained absences, hushed phone calls, a newfound interest in yoga classes that seemed to run unusually long. Most husbands might have dismissed these as the natural evolution of a marriage, but Michael wasn't most husbands. 7 months ago, he began noticing patterns. Lauren's schedule became increasingly erratic. Her real estate deals, once regular and transparent, became vague, potential clients that required evening meetings. She developed new interests, art galleries, wine tastings, weekend getaways with her sister that Michael was always too busy to join. Michael's security background had made him naturally cautious about digital privacy. But Lauren had always been careless with technology. Her laptop, iPad, and phone were connected to their home network, and Michael's equipment logged everything. He didn't actively monitor her communications until 4 months ago, when a business trip to Seattle had been canceled at the last minute. Had come home to find Lauren on a surprise girls' weekend that her sister knew nothing about. That night, Michael accessed Lauren's digital footprint for the first time in their marriage. What he found was a meticulously documented affair spanning almost 2 years. The man was Jason Burke, a high-profile divorce attorney who specialized in representing wealthy wives seeking to maximize their settlements. The irony wasn't lost on Michael. Jason was 44, recently divorced himself, with a reputation for being ruthless in court and very popular socially. His social media presence painted him as a modern playboy, expensive cars, exotic vacations, and a rotating cast of glamorous companions. Michael's research revealed that Jason had a pattern. He'd represent a wealthy woman in her divorce, pursue her romantically during the proceedings, and often ended up with both a hefty legal fee and a grateful ex-wife's temporary affections. But Lauren and Jason's relationship had evolved beyond his usual pattern. Their text exchanges revealed genuine affection alongside detailed plans for Michael's financial destruction. They'd been planning their strategy for months, waiting for the right moment to file for divorce when Michael's business assets were at their peak value. Lauren had been documenting Michael's work schedule, his income, even photographing important documents when she thought he wasn't looking. The most damaging discovery came from Jason's communications with Lauren about Michael's military background. They'd been researching ways to claim PTSD had affected Michael's decision-making abilities, potentially invalidating certain business decisions and property acquisitions. Jason had connections with psychologists who might testify to Michael's mental instability for the right price. Michael spent nearly a month studying their plan with the same methodical approach he'd once used to dismantle enemy networks. They'd underestimated him completely, viewing him as a straightforward military man who'd be blindsided by emotional manipulation. They had no idea that Michael's specialty had been psychological operations, the art of making enemies destroy themselves. The business trip to Dallas had been real, but Michael had completed his work early. He decided to return home a day ahead of schedule, planning to surprise Lauren with dinner at their favorite restaurant. As he pulled into his driveway at 3:52 p.m. on that crisp October afternoon, Michael saw an unusual number of cars lining his street. His trained eye immediately cataloged the vehicles: Lauren's Lexus, Jason's Audi, the lawyer's assistant's Toyota, and at least 8 other cars he didn't recognize. Michael parked a block away and approached his house with the stealth that had once made him invaluable in hostile territory. Through the living room window, he could see a banner stretched across the mantel. "Congratulations on your divorce." The room was full of people: Lauren's friends, some neighbors, a few people Michael recognized from Jason's social media photos. In the center of it all, Lauren and Jason stood with champagne glasses raised, accepting congratulations from the crowd. Haley and Logan were there, too, looking uncomfortable but participating in what they clearly believed was a celebration of their mother's freedom from an unhappy marriage. Michael watched for 19 minutes, his military training allowing him to remain completely still while his mind processed every detail. He identified every person in the room, noted the dynamics, observed the easy familiarity between Lauren and Jason that spoke of a relationship far beyond mere legal representation. The most painful moment came when he heard Logan ask his mother, "When will Dad sign the papers?" Lauren's response was delivered with a laugh that no longer sounded musical to Michael's ears. "Your stepfather will sign them, sweetie. He's not really equipped to fight this kind of battle. He's good at playing soldier, but this is the real world." The crowd laughed, and Michael felt something cold and final settle in his chest. These people were celebrating the destruction of his life, confident that he was too simple, too straightforward, too honest to protect himself. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Michael walked calmly back to his car, drove to a hotel, and began planning their downfall with the same meticulous care he'd once brought to neutralizing enemy assets. By the time he was finished, the celebration party would seem like a cruel joke compared to what was coming. The war had begun, and Michael Kincaid always won his wars. Michael checked into a downtown Denver Hilton under one of his backup identities, a habit from his intelligence days that Lauren had never known about. The sterile hotel room became his operational headquarters as he began implementing a strategy that would make his enemy's celebration seem premature. The first step was information warfare. Michael's security business maintained subscriptions to multiple investigative databases, and his military contacts provided access to resources that civilian investigators could never touch. By just after midnight, he had comprehensive dossiers on everyone who had attended the party. Jason Burke's file was particularly illuminating. The successful divorce attorney had built his reputation on winning difficult cases, but his methods often skirted ethical boundaries. Michael discovered 3 formal complaints filed with the Colorado Bar Association, all dismissed due to lack of evidence. More interesting were the whispered allegations among Denver's legal community about Jason's tendency to develop inappropriate personal relationships with vulnerable clients. The real revelation came from Michael's contact at the IRS. Jason's financial profile showed income patterns that didn't match his declared earnings. Large cash deposits appeared regularly in accounts tied to a consulting firm that existed only on paper. Michael's forensic accounting background, another skill from his military intelligence training, revealed that Jason was likely receiving payments from undisclosed sources. Michael's phone buzzed at 2:52 a.m. with a text from Lauren. "Flight delayed. Won't be home until tomorrow evening. Miss you." The lie was perfectly crafted, complete with a photo of an airport departure board that Michael's reverse image search revealed was taken about 5 weeks ago. Michael used his access to the home security system to confirm that Lauren and Jason were spending the night in Michael's own house. The cameras showed them moving through the rooms with casual familiarity, Jason examining Michael's study with particular interest. Michael watched them rifle through his desk, photograph documents, and even check his gun's safe, a violation that sealed Jason's fate in Michael's mind. The next morning, Michael began phase 2 of his operation. He drove to his office and activated protocols he'd established but never used. His security firm maintained relationships with private investigators across the country, many of them former military or law enforcement with flexible ethical standards when properly motivated. Within hours, Michael had teams monitoring both Lauren and Jason's activities, finances, and communications. But surveillance was only the beginning. Michael's real strength had always been psychological manipulation, understanding people's weaknesses and turning them against themselves. Michael's research into Jason's background revealed a pattern of relationships with wealthy, emotionally vulnerable women. But it also showed something else. Jason was deeply in debt despite his apparent success. The expensive cars were leased. The luxury condo was mortgaged beyond its value. And Jason's lifestyle required a constant stream of new clients and supplemental income. More importantly, Michael discovered that Jason's ex-wife, Danielle, lived in Aspen with a substantial settlement that included documentation of Jason's infidelity during their marriage. Michael's investigator made contact with Danielle, who proved surprisingly willing to discuss her ex-husband's predatory relationship patterns when she learned about Lauren. Meanwhile, Michael's monitoring of Lauren revealed that she'd been more deceptive than even he had imagined. The real estate deals she'd claimed were actually assignments from Jason, helping him identify wealthy women going through divorces who might become potential clients and romantic targets. Lauren had essentially been working as Jason's scout, identifying vulnerable women at country clubs and social events. Michael also discovered that Haley and Logan had been actively coached to provide testimony about Michael's supposedly controlling behavior and anger issues. Lauren had been recording conversations with the children, editing them to create evidence of Michael's alleged instability. The betrayal by his stepchildren, whom he'd loved as his own, added a personal dimension to Michael's growing rage. On his third day at the hotel, Michael received a call from his business partner, Colonel David Monroe, retired Army intelligence. Monroe had been conducting his own investigation into the party's guest list and had disturbing news. "Mike, you need to know that 3 of the people at that party work for competing security firms. They weren't there to celebrate Lauren's divorce. They were there to gather intelligence on your client list and business operations." The implication was staggering. Jason hadn't just been planning to take Michael's money in the divorce. He'd been planning to destroy Michael's business by selling client information to competitors. Several of Michael's clients were high-profile individuals whose security arrangements were worth millions. Exposing their vulnerabilities could cost Michael everything he'd built. Michael's investigation revealed that Jason had connections to a private investigation firm that specialized in corporate espionage. The firm, now operating under the name Apex Risk Consulting, had been hired by Michael's competitors to identify weaknesses in his business model. Jason's relationship with Lauren had provided the perfect inside access. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. Lauren hadn't just been cheating. She had been actively working to undermine Michael's livelihood. The divorce was merely the final step in a comprehensive plan to transfer Michael's wealth and business assets to Jason and his associates. Michael spent the 4th day creating false evidence that would lead Jason and Lauren into a trap of their own making. Using his knowledge of their psychology and weaknesses, he began planting information that would convince them to accelerate their timeline and make crucial mistakes. First, Michael created fictional communications suggesting that one of his major clients was about to sign a contract worth several $1,000,000. He ensured that Lauren would discover this information, knowing she would share it with Jason. The prospect of timing the divorce to coincide with Michael's largest payday would be irresistible. Second, Michael began displaying signs of stress and distraction, creating the impression that he was overwhelmed by business pressures and unaware of the impending divorce. He made strategic comments to mutual friends about feeling stretched thin and considering stepping back from the business. Third, Michael activated a deep cover asset he'd cultivated years earlier, a woman named Jenna Wallace, who worked in Jason's law firm. Jenna had provided Michael with occasional information about corporate client security needs, but she also had access to Jason's case files and calendar. Michael revealed just enough about Jason's plan to ensure Jenna's cooperation in gathering more detailed intelligence. By the end of the week, Michael had a complete picture of Jason and Lauren's strategy, their timeline, and their vulnerabilities. More importantly, he'd identified the psychological pressure points that would allow him to turn their conspiracy against them. The final piece of Michael's preparation involved his stepchildren. Despite their betrayal, Michael needed to understand their true level of involvement. His monitoring revealed that Haley and Logan genuinely believed Michael was a distant, controlling stepfather who made their mother unhappy. Lauren had spent months poisoning their perception of him, creating a narrative where Michael was the obstacle to their family's happiness. Michael felt a cold clarity settle over him as he reviewed the evidence. Lauren and Jason had declared war on everything he valued: his marriage, his children, his business, and his reputation. They'd celebrated his destruction while he was away, confident that he was too simple and straightforward to fight back effectively. They were about to learn that Michael Kincaid had survived and thrived in a world where psychological warfare was an art form. The celebration they'd thrown would be nothing compared to the reckoning that was coming. Michael checked out of the hotel and drove home, ready to begin the final phase of an operation that would leave his enemies wishing they'd never heard his name. Michael pulled into his driveway at 6:52 p.m. exactly when his original flight would have landed. He carried his luggage with the casual air of a man returning from a routine business trip, though his trained eyes noted every detail of his surroundings. The fancy nightwear from Jason's last visit was still in the laundry hamper. Lauren's carelessness would be one of many weaknesses Michael planned to exploit. Lauren greeted him at the door with a performance worthy of an award. She threw her arms around him, kissed him warmly, and peppered him with questions about his trip. Her eyes, however, held a glint of anticipation that Michael recognized from his interrogation training, the look of someone executing a carefully rehearsed plan. "I missed you so much," Lauren said, leading him to the kitchen where she'd prepared his favorite meal. "Haley and Logan will be home soon. They're both excited to see you." Michael played his part perfectly, sharing fabricated details about client meetings while studying his wife's reactions. When he mentioned the fictional multi-million-dollar contract, Lauren's eyes lit up with barely concealed excitement. She asked carefully casual questions about the timeline and payment structure that confirmed Michael's suspicions about her information gathering. Haley and Logan arrived home with the artificial enthusiasm Michael had learned to recognize. They hugged him dutifully and asked about his trip, but their discomfort was evident. Michael felt a pang of genuine sadness as he realized how completely Lauren had poisoned their relationship. These children, whom he'd loved unconditionally, now saw him as an adversary to be managed. Over dinner, Michael casually mentioned feeling overwhelmed by the business demands and hinted at considering bringing in partners to share the workload. Lauren's interest was immediate and intense, though she tried to hide it behind worried concern. "Maybe it's time to slow down," she suggested. "We have enough money. You could sell the business, and we could travel, spend more time together." Michael nodded thoughtfully, playing the role of a man considering his options. In reality, he was documenting every word for the psychological profile he was building. Lauren's eagerness to see him liquidate his assets confirmed that the divorce filing was imminent. After dinner, Michael retreated to his study under the pretense of catching up on work emails. In reality, he was reviewing the intelligence his team had gathered during his absence. Jenna Wallace had provided copies of Jason's case notes, revealing the full scope of their legal strategy. The attack would be comprehensive. Personal accusations of controlling behavior, professional claims of business instability, and financial arguments about Michael's allegedly risky client base. Most damaging would be the psychological evaluation Jason had arranged. Dr. Stephen Hartman, a psychologist with a questionable reputation, had already prepared a preliminary assessment of Michael's likely PTSD symptoms based entirely on Lauren's fabricated accounts. The evaluation would support claims that Michael's military background made him unstable and potentially dangerous. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from his surveillance team. Target 2 departing residents. Heading toward downtown. Jason was leaving his condo, likely heading to a strategy session with his co-conspirators. Michael activated the tracking protocols he'd established, following Jason's movement through the city. The meeting location was revealing: a private dining room at the Grand Regent Hotel, where Jason was joined by 3 individuals Michael recognized from his investigation. The first was Monica Reeves, a partner at a competing security firm who specialized in corporate intelligence. The second was David Chun, a forensic accountant who'd been hired to identify vulnerabilities in Michael's business structure. The third was Detective Carly Owens, a Denver police investigator whose presence suggested they were planning to involve law enforcement in Michael's destruction. Michael's long-range surveillance equipment allowed him to monitor their conversation from the hotel's parking garage. What he learned exceeded even his worst expectations. They weren't just planning a divorce. They were orchestrating a comprehensive campaign to destroy Michael's reputation, business, and freedom. The plan involved triggering a police investigation into Michael's business practices, suggesting possible connections to illegal surveillance or privacy violations. Detective Owens would initiate the inquiry based on an anonymous tip about Michael's investigative capabilities. The goal was to create enough legal uncertainty to freeze Michael's assets and drive away his high-profile clients. Meanwhile, Monica Reeves's firm would approach Michael's clients with carefully crafted concerns about his stability and professional reliability. The clients, already nervous about security breaches, would likely terminate their contracts to avoid association with a potentially compromised operator. Jason's role was to accelerate the divorce proceedings while Michael was distracted by the criminal investigation. With Michael's assets frozen and his income disrupted, he'd be forced to accept whatever settlement Jason offered to avoid financial ruin. The final element was the most personal. Haley and Logan would testify about Michael's increasingly erratic behavior and their fear for their safety. The children, genuinely believing they were protecting their mother from an unstable stepfather, would provide the emotional testimony needed to support the psychological evaluation. Michael listened to his family's destruction being planned with the detached professionalism that had once made him one of the military's most effective operatives. But beneath the cold analysis, something darker was awakening, a capacity for methodical retaliation that his enemies had dramatically underestimated. The meeting concluded with handshakes and confident smiles. They believed Michael was a simple military man who would be overwhelmed by their sophisticated attack. They were about to learn that Michael Kincaid had spent nearly a quarter-century perfecting the art of making enemies destroy themselves. Michael returned home to find Lauren in their bedroom wearing the same expensive nightwear he now knew she'd also worn around Jason. She approached him with practiced intimacy, her hands resting around his shoulders while her lips whispered fabricated endearments. Michael accepted her performance while his mind cataloged every detail for the psychological campaign that was about to begin. As Lauren fell asleep beside him, Michael slipped quietly from the bed and returned to his study. He activated secure communication protocols and began issuing orders to assets positioned across the country. The network he'd built during his military career was about to be unleashed on civilians who had no idea what they'd awakened. Michael's first move was subtle but devastating. He accessed Jason's digital footprint and began implanting evidence that would suggest Jason was blackmailing his clients. Using sophisticated techniques he'd learned in psychological operations, Michael created a pattern of communications that would appear to show Jason demanding additional payments from vulnerable women in exchange for favorable divorce settlements. The strength of the strategy was that it used Jason's actual relationship patterns against him. Several of his former clients had paid him unusual amounts during their divorces, creating a foundation of truth that would make the fabricated evidence seem credible. Michael's second move targeted Monica Reeves's security firm. Using his knowledge of their client acquisition strategy, he began feeding them false information about a major government contract that would require compromising Michael's operation. The firm would commit resources and potentially illegal acts pursuing a contract that didn't exist, creating legal vulnerabilities Michael could exploit later. The third move was the most complex. Michael began manipulating Detective Owens's investigation before it officially began. Using contacts in the Denver Police Department, he ensured that the anonymous tip about his business would be directed to internal affairs rather than the criminal division. Detective Owens's eagerness to pursue a case outside her jurisdiction would create ethical violations that would destroy her credibility. Michael worked through the night, implementing a counter-operation that would systematically dismantle everyone who had betrayed him. By dawn, the pieces were in motion for a campaign that would leave his enemies broken and his betrayers completely isolated. As Lauren stirred awake beside him, Michael returned to bed, and assumed the role of an unsuspecting husband. But behind his closed eyes, he was calculating the precise moment to spring a trap that would make their celebration party seem like a child's game compared to the devastation that was coming. The hunter had returned, and the prey had no idea they were already caught. Michael's campaign began with surgical precision on Monday morning. While Lauren prepared for what she believed was another day of secret planning with Jason, Michael initiated a psychological operation that would systematically dismantle their conspiracy from within. His first target was Dr. Stephen Hartman, the psychologist Jason had recruited to provide fabricated testimony about Michael's mental state. Michael's military records were classified, but Hartman had been conducting his evaluation based entirely on Lauren's fictional accounts and outdated psychology textbooks about combat stress. Michael arranged for Hartman to receive a package containing genuine PTSD case studies from a Veterans Affairs psychologist, cases that contradicted every assumption Hartman had made about Michael's condition. More importantly, the package included a letter supposedly from the Colorado Psychology Board questioning Hartman's recent testimony in several divorce cases. The letter, carefully crafted using Michael's knowledge of psychological profiling, suggested that Hartman's willingness to provide evaluations without direct patient contact was under investigation. Hartman's panic was immediate and predictable. Michael's surveillance showed the psychologist frantically contacting Jason about withdrawing from the case. Meanwhile, Michael activated Jenna Wallace's access to Jason's law firm. Jenna, motivated by Michael's revelation of Jason's exploitation of vulnerable women, began documenting Jason's unethical practices with zealous efficiency. She discovered that Jason had been overbilling clients, maintaining inappropriate relationships with multiple women, and sharing confidential information with non-clients. But Michael's masterstroke involved exploiting Jason's gambling addiction, a weakness Michael had discovered through financial surveillance. Jason's regular visits to underground poker games in Denver had created significant debts with dangerous people. Michael arranged for those debts to be purchased by associates from his military network, people who understood leverage and pressure. The strength of the strategy was that Jason would never know Michael was behind his sudden financial crisis. The debt collectors would simply become more insistent, demanding payment that Jason couldn't provide without accelerating his plan against Michael. The pressure would force Jason into increasingly desperate and reckless actions. Michael's second focus was Monica Reeves's security firm. Using his knowledge of their aggressive client acquisition tactics, Michael began feeding them intelligence about a fictional Department of Defense contract worth around $35 million. The contract supposedly required comprehensive background investigations of existing security providers, including Michael's firm. Monica's firm took the bait completely, assigning their best operatives to investigate Michael's business relationships. They began contacting his clients under false pretenses, gathering information they believed would give them a competitive advantage. In reality, they were documenting their own illegal surveillance activities, while Michael's monitoring systems recorded everything. The investigation would eventually reveal that Monica's firm was conducting unauthorized background checks on Michael's high-profile clients, including federal judges and corporate executives. The privacy violations would not only destroy Monica's business, but create criminal liability for everyone involved. Michael's manipulation of Detective Carla Owens required more subtlety. Owens's eagerness to pursue high-profile cases had led to several ethical concerns in her career, but she'd managed to avoid consequences through political connections and careful case selection. Michael would use her ambition against her. Through a network of informants Michael had cultivated during his security work, Owens began receiving anonymous tips about Michael's supposed illegal surveillance activities. The tips were carefully crafted to suggest a major case that could advance Owens's career, but they also pushed her to pursue investigations outside her jurisdiction and expertise. Michael ensured that Owens's inquiries would quickly attract the attention of state-level agencies who actually regulated private security operations. Her unauthorized investigation would create jurisdictional conflicts and expose her pattern of overreaching career-ending mistakes disguised as ambitious police work. But Michael's most complex target was his own family. Haley and Logan's involvement had cut deepest, but Michael recognized that they were victims of Lauren's manipulation rather than willing conspirators. His approach required separating the children from their mother's influence while exposing her deception. Michael began by subtly contradicting the narrative Lauren had created about their relationship. He started leaving small gifts for the children, Haley's favorite coffee from a shop near her school, Logan's preferred video game that Michael claimed to have ordered weeks ago. The gestures were designed to show thoughtfulness that contradicted Lauren's claims about Michael's indifference. More importantly, Michael began documenting his actual interactions with the children using discrete recording devices. When Lauren claimed Michael had yelled at Haley about her grades, Michael's recordings would show a patient conversation about study strategies. When she described Michael as controlling Logan's activities, the recordings revealed Michael encouraging his stepson's independence. Michael's surveillance also captured Lauren coaching the children on what to say about their stepfather. The recordings showed Lauren suggesting specific incidents that had never occurred and helping Haley and Logan remember events that contradicted their original experiences. The psychological pressure on Michael's enemies was carefully calibrated to force mistakes while maintaining the appearance of random misfortune. Jason's gambling debts would seem like a personal problem unrelated to his legal work. Monica's firm would appear to be the victim of their own aggressive tactics. Detective Owens would be caught in standard jurisdictional protocols that had nothing to do with Michael's case. But Michael's most sophisticated manipulation targeted Lauren herself. Using his knowledge of her psychology and insecurities, Michael began creating doubt about Jason's commitment to their relationship. Michael's team arranged for Lauren to accidentally encounter Jason at a restaurant with another woman, actually an operative who was documenting Jason's activities. The meeting appeared intimate, with Jason displaying the same close behavior Lauren thought was reserved for her. Michael also ensured that Lauren would discover Jason's financial problems through seemingly innocent social media posts and casual conversations with mutual acquaintances. The revelation that Jason was deeply in debt would undermine Lauren's belief that he was a successful attorney capable of providing financial security. Most devastatingly, Michael began planting evidence that Jason was pursuing relationships with other wealthy women going through divorces. Phone records and social media activity suggested that Lauren was just one of several women Jason was manipulating simultaneously. The psychological impact was immediate. Lauren's confidence in Jason's affection began to waver, and she started questioning whether their relationship would survive her divorce from Michael. The doubt created stress that affected her performance in both her affair and her marriage, making her increasingly careless about covering her tracks. By Thursday of that first week, Michael's enemies were beginning to turn on each other. Jason's financial pressure was making him demanding and short-tempered with Lauren. Monica's firm was becoming concerned about the risks they were taking for a contract that seemed increasingly elusive. Detective Owens was facing questions from her supervisors about her unauthorized investigation. Michael monitored their deteriorating cooperation through multiple surveillance channels while maintaining the facade of an unsuspecting husband. He attended Haley's soccer game, helped Logan with algebra homework, and planned a romantic weekend getaway with Lauren, all while orchestrating the systematic breakdown of their conspiracy. The strength of Michael's strategy was that his enemies were defeating themselves through their own weaknesses and illegal actions. Jason's gambling, Monica's greed, Owens's ambition, and Lauren's insecurity were being weaponized against them without any direct action that could be traced back to Michael. But Michael's ultimate goal wasn't just victory. It was total psychological domination. He wanted his enemies to understand that they had challenged someone far more dangerous than they could imagine. The real war was just beginning, and Michael intended to win it so decisively that no one would ever underestimate him again. As the initial phase of his campaign concluded, Michael prepared for the next step, forcing his enemies into open conflict with each other while positioning himself as the obvious victor in any confrontation. The celebration party would soon seem like a distant memory compared to the destruction that was coming. The next stage of Michael's campaign began with Jason Burke's world collapsing in ways that seemed unrelated but were meticulously orchestrated. Michael's military contacts had purchased Jason's gambling debts and were now applying pressure that went far beyond financial obligation. Tony Marino, a former Army Ranger who now worked private security in Las Vegas, visited Jason's office on Monday morning. Tony's appearance, scarred hands, cold eyes, and the kind of stillness that suggested pressure was always an option, terrified Jason's secretary and clients. But Tony's message was delivered with professional courtesy that made it more frightening than any overt threat. Mr. Burke, you owe certain people a considerable amount of money. These people have sold your debt to individuals who are less patient than they were. I'm here to discuss a payment plan that works for everyone involved. Jason's hands shook as he reviewed documents showing debts totaling $340,000 from poker games, sports betting, and casino credit lines. The debts had been accumulating for months, but the original creditors had been patient because of Jason's legal reputation. The new creditors were different. They viewed Jason's luxury lifestyle as evidence that he could pay immediately if properly motivated. I need time, Jason protested. I have major cases coming to settlement. The money will be available soon. Tony's smile was professionally sympathetic. My employers are reasonable people. They understand that lawyers have a regular income, but they also understand that lawyers have assets, property, investments, professional reputation. They're willing to accept alternative forms of payment if cash isn't immediately available. The implications were clear. Jason's professional license, his condo, even his personal safety were now collateral for debts that Michael had engineered. The pressure would force Jason to accelerate his timeline against Michael while making increasingly desperate decisions. Meanwhile, Monica Reeves's security firm was discovering that their investigation of Michael's clients had attracted unwanted federal attention. FBI Special Agent Lisa Nguyen contacted Monica's office on Tuesday afternoon with questions about unauthorized surveillance activities that had been reported by several high-profile individuals. Ms. Reeves, we've received complaints that your firm has been conducting background investigations without proper authorization. Several federal judges and corporate executives have reported suspicious inquiries about their security arrangements. Monica's confidence evaporated as Agent Nguyen described investigations that Monica's team had conducted in pursuit of the fictional Department of Defense contract. The FBI had been monitoring those activities as potential industrial espionage, and Monica's firm was now under federal investigation for privacy violations. I can explain everything, Monica said, though she couldn't explain why the supposed contract seemed to have vanished from all official records. I'm sure you can, Agent Nguyen replied. We'll be scheduling formal interviews with your entire investigative team. I suggest you retain counsel familiar with federal privacy law. Michael's manipulation of Detective Carla Owens was even more sophisticated. Owens's unauthorized investigation of Michael's business had triggered automatic notifications to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, which maintained oversight of private security licensing. State investigators contacted Owens's superiors with concerns about jurisdictional overreach and potential misconduct. Captain Philip Sanders called Owens into his office on Wednesday morning with a file that made her stomach sink. Carla, I'm getting calls from state agencies asking why one of my detectives is investigating a private security firm without coordination or authorization. They want to know if we're conducting some kind of joint operation that they weren't informed about. Owens tried to explain her anonymous tips and suspicions about Michael's activities, but her explanations only made her situation worse. The captain noted that Owens had been pursuing investigations outside her expertise and jurisdiction, using police resources for unauthorized intelligence gathering. You're suspended pending internal investigation, Sanders announced. Turn in your badge and weapon. This could result in disciplinary action if it turns out you've been conducting unauthorized surveillance. But Michael's most devastating attack targeted the relationship between Lauren and Jason. Using psychological manipulation techniques he'd perfected in military intelligence, Michael began systematically destroying their trust in each other. Michael's team arranged for Lauren to receive anonymous messages with photos of Jason meeting other women. The photos were legitimate. Jason's pattern of pursuing multiple wealthy clients was well documented, but Michael's operatives ensured that Lauren would interpret them as evidence of ongoing disloyalty. The messages were accompanied by financial documents showing Jason's massive debts and declining income. Lauren discovered that the successful attorney she'd fallen in love with was actually a desperate man facing financial ruin and potential pressure from creditors. Most damaging was a fabricated conversation Michael's team provided to Lauren, supposedly recorded by one of Jason's gambling associates. In the recording, created using voice synthesis technology Michael had access to through military contacts, Jason discussed his relationship with Lauren in crude, dismissive terms that suggested she was merely a means to financial recovery. "She thinks I'm in love with her," the fake Jason said. "But once I get her husband's money, she'll be just another divorce client." These desperate housewives are all the same. They need someone to tell them they're special while they tear apart their own families. Lauren's reaction was immediate and predictable. She confronted Jason during what she thought was a private meeting at his condo, but Michael's surveillance captured every word of their argument. "You lied to me," Lauren shouted. "You're just using me like all the others. Everything you said about loving me was a lie." Jason's denials were desperate and unconvincing, especially when Lauren confronted him with evidence of his financial problems and the photos of him with other women. His explanation that the debts were temporary and the women were just clients only confirmed Lauren's suspicions that she was being manipulated. "I thought you were different," Lauren said, her voice breaking. "I risked my marriage for you, and you're just another schemer." Jason's response revealed his true character. "Your marriage was already falling apart, Lauren. You came to me because you were unhappy and wanted out. Don't blame me for giving you what you asked for." The argument escalated until Lauren stormed out, their conspiracy fractured by mutual distrust and recrimination. Michael's surveillance showed both of them spending the rest of the week trying to salvage their individual positions while abandoning their joint strategy. Jason's desperation led him to make the exact mistake Michael had anticipated. Facing pressure from creditors and the loss of Lauren's cooperation, Jason decided to accelerate the divorce filing and pursue Michael's assets independently. But without Lauren's inside information and cooperation, Jason's legal strategy became transparent and predictable. Jason filed for emergency orders claiming Michael posed an immediate threat to Lauren and the children. The filing was rushed and poorly documented, based on fabricated evidence that Michael's monitoring had already captured in advance. Michael's legal team, the same high-powered firm that Jason had hoped to outmaneuver, was ready with comprehensive counterarguments that made Jason look careless and vindictive. Meanwhile, Lauren's confusion and emotional turmoil led her to seek support from people Michael had strategically positioned. Dr. Emily Park, a therapist who specialized in marriage counseling, had been recommended to Lauren by a friend who was actually one of Michael's assets. Dr. Park's sessions with Lauren were designed to help her recognize the manipulation she'd experienced while gradually revealing the extent of her betrayal of Michael. The counseling created genuine guilt and confusion that undermined Lauren's ability to maintain her deception. By Friday of this stage, Michael's enemies were in full retreat. Jason was facing financial ruin, federal scrutiny, and the collapse of his legal case. Monica's firm was under criminal investigation and had lost several major clients. Detective Owens was suspended and facing potential disciplinary measures. Lauren was emotionally shaken and beginning to question everything she believed about her relationship with both Jason and Michael. But Michael wasn't finished. He had dismantled their conspiracy and turned them against each other. But his ultimate goal was complete psychological domination. He wanted them to understand that they had challenged someone who operated on a level they couldn't comprehend. As Michael reviewed the latest intelligence reports, he felt the cold satisfaction of a strategist who had successfully isolated his adversaries. The real destruction was about to begin, and Michael intended to ensure that his enemies would never fully recover from the mistakes they'd made. The celebration party had marked the beginning of their downfall. Now Michael Kincaid was ready to show them what real power looked like when applied with disciplined planning and relentless focus. Week 4 of Michael's campaign opened with Jason Burke's professional life imploding in spectacular fashion. The combination of gambling debts, federal investigation, and his disastrous legal filing against Michael had created a perfect storm that would destroy everything Jason had built. The Colorado Bar Association received a formal complaint about Jason's conduct filed by Jenna Wallace with Michael's careful guidance. The complaint documented Jason's pattern of exploiting vulnerable clients, maintaining inappropriate relationships during legal representation, and sharing confidential information with unauthorized individuals. Jenna had spent weeks gathering evidence that painted a picture of systematic ethical violations. But the real devastation came from Jason's own desperation. Facing immediate pressure from Michael's military associates who had purchased his gambling debts, Jason made a decision that would end his legal career. He attempted to take money from his client trust fund. Michael's surveillance captured Jason accessing the account at 11:52 p.m. on Monday night, transferring $200,000 intended for client settlements to his personal account. The transfer was immediately flagged by banking security protocols that Michael had ensured would be monitoring Jason's activities. "Mr. Burke," said Detective Daniel Park, no relation to Dr. Emily Park, when he arrived at Jason's office Tuesday morning, "you're under arrest for theft of client funds and misappropriation of attorney trust accounts." Jason's arrest was captured by news media that Michael's contacts had alerted about the prominent attorney's downfall. The images of Jason in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his face showing panic were broadcast across Denver's legal community within hours. Monica Reeves's security firm faced an even more comprehensive destruction. The FBI investigation into their unauthorized surveillance had expanded to include charges of wire fraud, privacy violations, and conspiracy to commit industrial espionage. Agent Lisa Nguyen's team had discovered that Monica's firm had been selling confidential information about their surveillance targets to competitors and foreign intelligence operatives. Michael's fictional Department of Defense contract had led Monica's team to document their own illegal activities so thoroughly that prosecutors would have overwhelming evidence for multiple felony charges. The firm that had planned to destroy Michael's business through illegal surveillance was now facing federal prison sentences for crimes Michael had manipulated them into committing. "We've identified systematic violations of federal privacy law," Agent Nguyen told reporters outside Monica's office as FBI agents carried out boxes of evidence. "This organization appears to have been operating as a criminal enterprise rather than a legitimate security firm." Detective Carla Owens' situation was equally catastrophic. The internal affairs investigation had revealed that her unauthorized pursuit of Michael was just the latest in a pattern of misconduct that included taking bribes, falsifying evidence, and conducting personal investigations using police resources. Owens' suspension had triggered a comprehensive review of her cases, revealing that several convictions she'd obtained were based on illegally gathered evidence. The district attorney's office was facing the prospect of multiple overturned convictions and civil rights lawsuits stemming from Owens' violations. Detective Owens has been terminated and is facing criminal charges, announced Captain Philip Sanders in a press conference that Michael watched with cold satisfaction. "We're reviewing all cases she was involved in for potential misconduct." But Michael's most complex target remained his own family. Lauren's therapy sessions with Dr. Emily Park had created genuine psychological turmoil as she began to recognize the extent of her betrayal and manipulation. "I don't understand how I became this person," Lauren confessed during a session that Michael's surveillance equipment recorded. "I convinced myself that Michael was the problem, but I think I was just looking for excuses to justify what I wanted to do." Dr. Park guided Lauren through a process of recognizing the psychological manipulation she'd experienced while also confronting her own choices. The therapy was legitimate. Michael wanted Lauren to genuinely understand her betrayal rather than simply being punished for it. "You allowed Jason to convince you that your marriage was worse than it was," Dr. Park observed. "But you also made choices to deceive your husband and involve your children in that deception. Understanding why you made those choices is the first step toward making better ones." Lauren's growing awareness of her situation created genuine remorse that manifested in her behavior toward Michael. She began trying to reconnect with her husband, expressing affection and interest that seemed authentic because it was. Though Michael knew it was motivated by guilt rather than love, Michael's manipulation of Haley and Logan was even more sophisticated. He'd begun revealing his evidence of their mother's coaching gradually, allowing them to recognize the manipulation they'd experienced without directly attacking Lauren. Michael left transcripts of Lauren's coaching sessions where the children would find them, presented as therapy materials for marriage counseling. The transcripts showed their mother suggesting specific false memories and encouraging them to exaggerate their negative feelings about Michael. The psychological impact on the children was immediate. Haley, now 18 and more capable of understanding adult deception, was devastated to realize how her mother had manipulated her perceptions of Michael. "Did Mom really coach us to lie about you?" Haley asked Michael during a car ride that he'd specifically arranged to be private. Michael's response was carefully crafted to convey hurt without creating hostility toward Lauren. "Your mother was unhappy and confused, Haley. She convinced herself that I was the source of her problems, and she needed you and Logan to support that belief. But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. It means she made some very bad choices. Logan's reaction was even more intense. At 14, he was old enough to understand betrayal, but young enough to feel completely devastated by his mother's deception. His relationship with Lauren became strained as he struggled to reconcile the mother he loved with the woman who had manipulated him into betraying Michael. Michael's recordings of his actual interactions with the children, patient, supportive, and encouraging, contrasted sharply with the angry, controlling stepfather Lauren had described. The evidence of her deception created loyalty shifts that would be permanent. But Michael's ultimate revelation was reserved for the end of the 4th week. On Friday evening, he called a family meeting in their living room, the same room where the celebration party had occurred 4 weeks earlier. "I need to discuss some things that have been happening in our family," Michael announced, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded military units. "Things that I think you all need to understand." Michael revealed that he knew about the affair, the conspiracy, and the celebration party. But he did so with evidence that was so comprehensive and detailed that denial was impossible. Phone records, photographs, financial documents, and audio recordings painted a picture of betrayal that was undeniable. "4 weeks ago, you celebrated my destruction while I was working to support this family," Michael said, his eyes moving from Lauren to Haley to Logan. "You planned to take everything I'd built and destroy my reputation based on lies and manipulation." Lauren's face went white as Michael displayed evidence she didn't know existed. The children stared in shock at documentation of their mother's affair and their own coaching sessions. "You involved my children in a conspiracy to commit fraud," Michael continued, his voice never rising but carrying an intensity that made the room feel smaller. "You celebrated the destruction of their home while convincing them that I was the enemy." The psychological impact was devastating and immediate. Lauren began crying, not from remorse, but from the realization that Michael had known everything while she believed she was deceiving him. Haley and Logan sat in stunned silence, processing the complete collapse of everything they believed about their family situation. "What happens now?" Haley whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael's response was delivered with the cold precision of a military briefing. "Now you learn what happens when you betray someone who spent 24 years protecting this country from people who wanted to destroy it." Michael stood and walked to the window that overlooked their neighborhood, the same window through which he'd watched their celebration party 4 weeks earlier. The psychological reversal was complete. They had celebrated his defeat while he was actually orchestrating their destruction. "Jason is in jail for taking client funds," Michael announced without turning around. "Monica's company is under federal investigation for espionage. Detective Owens has been fired and faces criminal charges. Everything they built has been destroyed." The silence in the room was absolute as Michael's family realized they had underestimated him in ways they were only beginning to understand. "The celebration is over," Michael said finally, turning to face them with eyes that showed no trace of the man they thought they knew. "Now comes the reckoning." The revelation of Michael's knowledge transformed the Kincaid household into a psychological battlefield where every interaction carried the weight of betrayal and retribution. Lauren's tears had dried into a mask of desperate calculation as she realized that her husband's apparent obliviousness had been an elaborate performance covering intelligence gathering that would have impressed the CIA. Michael's demand for a family meeting the next morning was delivered with military precision. Saturday, 8:15 a.m. formal dining room. Mandatory attendance. The location was significant. The formal dining room was where Michael conducted his most serious business discussions, and the message was clear that this would be a business negotiation rather than a family conversation. Lauren arrived first, having spent the night alternating between panic and planning. She tried to contact Jason, only to discover that his phone had been disconnected and his law office was closed pending the criminal investigation. Monica Reeves wasn't answering her calls, and Detective Owens was facing her own legal crisis. The conspiracy that had seemed so powerful 4 weeks ago had completely collapsed, leaving Lauren isolated and exposed. Haley and Logan entered together, their faces showing the emotional devastation of discovering their mother's manipulation. The children had spent hours the previous night reviewing the evidence Michael had presented, trying to reconcile the mother they loved with the woman who had systematically deceived them. Michael entered at exactly 8:15 a.m., carrying a leather portfolio that contained documents that would determine their family's future. His appearance was immaculate: pressed khakis, button-down shirt, and the kind of precise grooming that suggested complete control over every detail of his environment. "This meeting will proceed according to specific rules," Michael announced, taking his position at the head of the table. "Lauren, you will answer questions truthfully and completely. Haley and Logan, you will listen and learn. No one will leave this room until we've addressed every aspect of the betrayal that has infected this family." Michael opened the portfolio and spread documents across the table with the systematic precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence. Financial records showing Jason's gambling debts, surveillance photos documenting the affair, transcripts of coaching sessions where Lauren had manipulated the children's perceptions. But the most devastating evidence was personal. Recordings of private conversations where Lauren had mocked Michael's military service, dismissed his business acumen, and described him as too simple to understand what's really happening. "Lauren," Michael said, his voice carrying the authority of a commanding officer, "explain to Haley and Logan why you told Jason that their stepfather was playing soldier while you conducted real-world business." Lauren's attempt to explain her words only made her situation worse. Every justification revealed additional layers of deception and contempt that contradicted her claims of loving Michael or wanting what was best for the family. "I was angry," Lauren stammered. "I said things I didn't mean. The affair made me confused about everything." Michael's response was clinical and devastating. "You weren't confused, Lauren. You were executing a plan. Show them the timeline." Michael displayed a comprehensive timeline of Lauren's activities, showing that her involvement with Jason had coincided with systematic intelligence gathering about Michael's business, financial planning for a divorce that would maximize her settlement, and psychological manipulation of the children that began months before the relationship crossed any boundaries. "This wasn't confusion," Michael explained to Haley and Logan. "This was a campaign designed to destroy your family for financial gain. Your mother spent about 7 months preparing to betray everything we'd built together." The children's reactions revealed Michael's success in separating them from their mother's influence. Haley's questions were sharp and analytical, demanding explanations that Lauren couldn't provide. Logan's anger was more direct, asking why his mother had taught him to lie about the man who had been more of a father than his biological parent had ever been. But Michael's ultimate revelation was still to come. He produced a document that made Lauren's face go completely white. A comprehensive psychological profile that Michael had commissioned from Dr. Emily Park based on months of surveillance and behavioral analysis. "Dr. Park has diagnosed you with antisocial personality disorder," Michael announced. "Your capacity for deception, manipulation, and lack of genuine empathy suggests that you're psychologically incapable of maintaining honest relationships." The diagnosis was devastating, not because it was unexpected, but because it was accurate. Dr. Park's analysis described Lauren's pattern of using emotional manipulation to exploit the people who loved her, her inability to accept responsibility for her actions, and her tendency to view relationships as strategic opportunities rather than genuine emotional connections. "This means," Michael continued, "that you cannot be trusted with the emotional welfare of children. Haley and Logan deserve to understand that their mother's behavior reflects a psychological condition rather than normal relationship problems." Michael's military background had taught him that psychological warfare was most effective when it revealed truth rather than creating fiction. Lauren's disorder explained her ability to maintain elaborate deceptions while appearing genuinely loving and concerned. The meeting continued for nearly 4 hours as Michael systematically dismantled every excuse, justification, and attempt at emotional manipulation that Lauren offered. His questions were precise and relentless, designed to force honesty about actions that Lauren had never expected to defend. By 11:20 a.m., the family dynamics had completely shifted. Haley and Logan were asking Michael about legal procedures for changing custody arrangements. Lauren was isolated at the opposite end of the table, facing the reality that her psychological manipulation had been documented and analyzed by professionals. Michael's final announcement was delivered with the calm authority of someone who held complete control over the situation. "Lauren, You have 36 hours to vacate this house. You will take your personal belongings and nothing else. Any attempt to contact the children, influence their decisions, or interfere with this family will result in criminal charges for fraud, conspiracy, and child endangerment. Michael produced restraining order paperwork that had already been prepared and needed only Lauren's signature to avoid immediate arrest. The children have legal options regarding custody, Michael continued. They're old enough to make informed decisions about which parent can provide a stable, honest environment. I trust they'll make the right choice. Haley and Logan's response was immediate and unanimous. They wanted to remain with Michael and limit contact with their mother until she received psychological treatment for her behavioral disorders. Lauren's final attempt at emotional manipulation, tears, apologies, and promises to change fell flat against the weight of documented evidence and professional psychological analysis. Her children now understood that her emotions were performed rather than genuine, tools of manipulation rather than expressions of authentic feeling. 36 hours, Michael repeated, closing the portfolio with the finality of a military operation reaching its conclusion. Security cameras will monitor your packing to ensure nothing unauthorized leaves this house. Michael stood and left the room, followed by Haley and Logan, who were eager to discuss their legal options and future living arrangements. Lauren remained at the table, staring at evidence of her own psychological disorders and facing the complete collapse of everything she had tried to accomplish. The celebration party 4 weeks ago had marked the beginning of Lauren's campaign against Michael. The family meeting had marked the end of her relationship with the children she had tried to use as weapons against the man who had loved them unconditionally. Michael's war was entering its final phase, and his enemies were discovering that challenging a man trained in psychological operations had consequences they could never have imagined. Michael's systematic destruction of his enemies reached its climax during the 5th week of his campaign, as the legal and financial consequences of their actions created a cascade of failures that exceeded even his strategic projections. The morning after Lauren's ultimatum, Michael received intelligence reports that confirmed his enemies were facing complete personal and professional destruction. Jason Burke's arrest for taking client funds had triggered a comprehensive investigation that revealed the scope of his criminal activities. FBI financial analysts discovered that Jason had been systematically taking money from client trust accounts for nearly 3 years, using the money to cover gambling debts and maintain his expensive lifestyle. The total amount exceeded $1.3 million, making him eligible for federal charges that carried mandatory minimum sentences. But Michael's manipulation had ensured that Jason's downfall would be even more complete. Tony Marino, Michael's military associate who had been pressuring Jason about gambling debts, visited Jason in jail with an offer that demonstrated Michael's psychological sophistication. "Jason, my employers are willing to forgive your gambling debts in exchange for information about other attorneys who might have similar financial problems," Tony explained. "We're expanding our collection business and need intelligence about potential clients." Jason's acceptance of the deal, desperate to avoid pressure from his creditors, created legal complications that would destroy any chance of defending against the criminal charges. By agreeing to inform on his legal colleagues, Jason had violated attorney-client privilege and professional ethics in ways that would result in permanent disbarment, even if he avoided prison. Michael's manipulation of Jason's psychology had achieved perfect results. Jason had chosen immediate physical safety over long-term legal protection, ensuring his complete professional destruction. Monica Reeves's security firm faced an even more comprehensive demolition. The FBI investigation had revealed that Monica's team had been conducting unauthorized surveillance on federal judges, corporate executives, and government officials for foreign intelligence services. The case had evolved from privacy violations to national security crimes that would result in decades of federal prison sentences. Agent Nguyen's press conference announcing the charges was broadcast nationally, making Monica's name synonymous with corporate espionage and treason. The firm that had planned to destroy Michael's business through illegal surveillance was now the subject of congressional hearings about foreign intelligence penetration of American security companies. This organization was essentially operating as a front for foreign intelligence services, Agent Nguyen announced. They exploited their legitimate security work to gather information about American government officials and corporate leaders. Michael's fictional Department of Defense contract had been so convincing that Monica's team had committed genuine espionage crimes in pursuit of intelligence they believed would win them government business. The irony was devastating. Michael's psychological operation had tricked them into committing the exact crimes they had planned to falsely accuse him of. Detective Carla Owens's destruction was equally complete, but more personal. The internal affairs investigation had revealed that Owens had been taking bribes from private investigators and defense attorneys in exchange for favorable treatment of their cases. Her unauthorized pursuit of Michael was just the latest example of misconduct that had corrupted dozens of criminal investigations. The district attorney's office was facing a crisis as defense attorneys demanded reviews of every case Owens had been involved in. For murder, convictions had already been overturned due to evidence that Owens had falsified reports and suppressed exculpatory evidence. Carla Owens represents everything that's wrong with police corruption, announced the district attorney during a press conference that Michael watched with satisfaction. Her actions have compromised the integrity of our entire criminal justice system. Owens's personal life was also collapsing under the weight of criminal charges and civil lawsuits. Her husband had filed for divorce. Her children were refusing contact, and her pension had been revoked due to the criminal convictions she was facing. Michael's manipulation of Owens's ambition had achieved perfect psychological results. She had destroyed her own career by pursuing a case that would have enhanced her reputation if Michael had actually been guilty of the crimes she was investigating. But Michael's most satisfying victory was the complete psychological destruction of Lauren's identity and future prospects. Dr. Emily Park's diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder had been shared with family court services, making it virtually impossible for Lauren to obtain custody or unsupervised visitation with Haley and Logan. More devastatingly, Michael's documentation of Lauren's affair and conspiracy had created grounds for criminal charges of fraud, conspiracy, and child endangerment. Lauren's coaching of the children to provide false testimony about Michael's behavior constituted criminal conspiracy that could result in significant prison time. Michael's legal team had prepared a comprehensive civil lawsuit that would hold Lauren personally liable for damages to Michael's business and reputation. The lawsuit would seek compensation for the emotional distress caused to Haley and Logan, the financial costs of defending against false allegations, and punitive damages for conspiracy and fraud. Mrs. Kincaid's actions constitute a criminal conspiracy that targeted not just her husband's finances, but his professional reputation and relationship with the children he had raised as his own, explained Michael's attorney, Margaret Foster, during a deposition that Michael monitored remotely. The civil lawsuit would ensure that Lauren could never financially recover from her betrayal, even if she avoided criminal prosecution. Michael's comprehensive documentation of her activities had created legal liability that would follow her for decades. But Michael's ultimate psychological victory came from Haley and Logan's complete rejection of their mother's influence. The children had filed formal requests with family court services to terminate Lauren's parental rights and request adoption by Michael, despite the fact that he was only their stepfather by blood. Lauren Kincaid has demonstrated a pattern of psychological manipulation and emotional abuse that makes her unfit for parental responsibility. Read the petition that Haley had written with assistance from Michael's legal team. Michael Kincaid has provided the stability, support, and honest communication that we need to develop into healthy adults. The children's testimony would be devastating to any attempt Lauren might make to restore her relationship with them. They could articulate specific examples of manipulation, describe the emotional impact of being coached to lie about Michael, and explain their decision to choose Michael as their legal father. Michael's most sophisticated psychological operation involved ensuring that Lauren understood the scope of her defeat. He arranged for her to receive detailed reports about Jason's criminal charges, Monica's espionage investigation, and Owens's career destruction. The reports were accompanied by a simple message: "This is what happens to people who betray Michael Kincaid." Lauren's reaction was captured by surveillance equipment Michael had maintained in her temporary apartment. The psychological impact of realizing that Michael had orchestrated the destruction of everyone involved in the conspiracy created a level of fear and despair that approached complete mental breakdown. Michael's military training had taught him that psychological warfare was most effective when enemies understood that their defeat was total and irreversible. Lauren needed to recognize that challenging Michael had consequences that would follow her for the rest of her life. The week concluded with Michael receiving a phone call that confirmed his complete victory. Haley and Logan had been interviewed by family court services about their custody preferences, and their testimony had been so compelling that the court was prepared to grant Michael's adoption request and terminate Lauren's parental rights. "Mr. Kincaid," said Judge Catherine Walsh during a conference call with Michael's attorney, "I've rarely seen children so articulate about their reasons for choosing one parent over another. Haley and Logan have clearly thought deeply about this decision, and their reasoning is sound." Michael's response was delivered with the professional courtesy that had characterized all his interactions with the legal system. "Your Honor, my only concern is providing Haley and Logan with the stable, honest environment they deserve. I'm honored that they've chosen to remain part of my family." As Michael hung up the phone, he reflected on the complete transformation of his situation. About 5 weeks ago, he had been the target of a conspiracy designed to destroy his marriage, his business, and his relationship with his children. Now, his enemies were facing criminal charges and professional destruction, while Haley and Logan were choosing him as their permanent father. The celebration party had marked the beginning of his enemy's downfall. The family court hearing would mark the beginning of Michael's new life as the legal father of children who had learned to value honesty, loyalty, and strength of character. Michael's war was almost over, and his victory was absolute. For months after the celebration party that had marked the beginning of their destruction, Michael's enemies were facing the permanent consequences of challenging someone whose military training had prepared him for psychological warfare on a level they could never have imagined. Jason Burke was serving a federal sentence of 14 years for taking client funds, conspiracy, and racketeering. The comprehensive investigation had revealed a pattern of criminal behavior that extended back to the beginning of his legal career. His law license had been permanently revoked, his assets seized to compensate victims, and his reputation destroyed so thoroughly that even criminal defendants refused his representation. The psychological pressure Michael had applied through gambling debt collectors had forced Jason into decisions that ensured his complete destruction. His cooperation with loan sharks to gather information about other attorneys had violated attorney-client privilege so extensively that he faced additional charges for professional misconduct that would extend his prison sentence by several years. Monica Reeves's security firm had been completely dismantled by federal investigators who discovered evidence of espionage activities spanning 6 years. Monica herself was serving a 22-year sentence for conspiracy to commit espionage and violation of national security laws. Her company's client list had been shared with foreign intelligence services, creating ongoing national security investigations that would continue for decades. The fictional Department of Defense contract that Michael had used to lure Monica into illegal surveillance had been so convincing that congressional hearings were examining how foreign intelligence services could manipulate American security companies. Monica's name would forever be associated with the security failures that allowed foreign powers to gather intelligence on American government officials. Detective Carla Owens was serving 9 years for corruption, evidence tampering, and violation of civil rights. The internal affairs investigation had revealed that her misconduct had affected over 70 criminal cases, resulting in wrongful convictions, suppressed evidence, and denial of due process to defendants who had trusted the legal system to provide fair treatment. Owens's personal life had been completely destroyed by the exposure of her corruption. Her family had rejected her, her colleagues had testified against her, and her pension had been revoked to compensate victims of her misconduct. She would leave prison as a middle-aged woman with no career prospects, no family support, and a criminal record that would prevent employment in any position requiring trust or responsibility. Michael's manipulation of each enemy's psychological weaknesses had achieved results that exceeded his strategic projections. Their own character flaws, Jason's gambling addiction, Monica's greed, Owens's ambition, and Lauren's narcissism, had been weaponized against them with surgical precision. But Michael's most complete victory was the transformation of his family structure. Haley and Logan's adoption had been finalized in family court with testimony that moved even experienced legal professionals to tears. "Michael Kincaid saved our family," Haley had testified, her voice strong and clear despite the emotional weight of the hearing. "He loved us unconditionally, while our mother was planning to destroy the man who had given us everything we needed to become good people. Logan's testimony was equally powerful. My biological father abandoned us, and my mother tried to teach us to betray the man who actually raised us. Michael never asked us to choose between our parents. He just showed us what real love and protection looked like. The judge's decision to grant the adoption and terminate Lauren's parental rights was based on evidence that demonstrated a pattern of psychological manipulation and emotional abuse that made her unfit for parental responsibility. In 32 years on the family court bench, Judge Walsh had announced, "I've rarely seen children so clear about their need to separate from a biological parent." Haley and Logan have articulated their reasoning with remarkable maturity and emotional intelligence. Michael's relationship with his newly adopted children had grown stronger through the shared experience of recognizing and overcoming manipulation. Haley was thriving in her senior year of high school, having gained confidence from understanding that her previous emotional confusion had been caused by external manipulation rather than personal weakness. Logan had embraced his role in their reformed family with enthusiasm that reflected his relief at escaping his mother's psychological control. His grades had improved dramatically once he was free from the stress of maintaining false narratives about Michael's behavior. Most importantly, both children had developed sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation that would protect them from similar exploitation in future relationships. Michael's military training in recognizing and countering deception had become valuable life skills that he was passing on to the next generation. Michael's business had emerged from the conspiracy stronger than ever. The publicity surrounding his enemy's criminal convictions had enhanced his reputation as a security professional capable of protecting clients from sophisticated threats. Government agencies and corporate executives who had learned about Michael's successful defense against the conspiracy were eager to retain his services. The irony was perfect. The conspiracy designed to destroy Michael's business had actually demonstrated his capabilities so effectively that his client base had doubled. Companies facing industrial espionage, government officials concerned about foreign intelligence threats, and wealthy individuals worried about professional manipulation were all seeking Michael's expertise. Michael had also established a consulting practice that specialized in teaching psychological warfare techniques to military and law enforcement professionals. His successful defense against a civilian conspiracy had created demand for training that would help others recognize and counter similar threats. But Michael's most satisfying achievement was the complete psychological destruction of Lauren's sense of identity and future prospects. The civil lawsuit had resulted in a judgment that would require her to pay Michael nearly $2.3 million in damages for fraud, conspiracy, and emotional distress. Lauren's real estate license had been revoked due to the criminal conspiracy charges, and her professional reputation was so damaged that she couldn't find employment in any field requiring trust or responsibility. She was working minimum-wage retail jobs while living in a studio apartment and facing decades of debt that would never be fully repaid. Michael's surveillance indicated that Lauren had developed severe depression and anxiety disorders that reflected the psychological impact of losing everything she had valued. Her therapy sessions revealed ongoing struggles with accepting responsibility for her actions and genuine confusion about how she had misjudged Michael so completely. The psychological profile that Dr. Emily Park had created was proving accurate in ways that were both scientifically interesting and personally devastating to Lauren. Her antisocial personality disorder made it difficult for her to form genuine relationships, and her history of manipulation made others suspicious of her motives even in casual interactions. Michael had achieved the ultimate psychological victory. Lauren was experiencing the social isolation and emotional confusion that she had tried to create for him. The difference was that Michael's isolation would have been based on false accusations, while Lauren's was based on documented behavior that reflected her true character. 7 months after the celebration party, Michael stood in his backyard watching Haley and Logan help their friends prepare for a graduation party that would celebrate Haley's acceptance to Stanford University. The contrast with the scene 7 months earlier was profound. Instead of celebrating his destruction, his family was celebrating their success and future together. Michael's phone rang with a call from Colonel David Monroe, his former business partner, who had helped expose the conspiracy. "Mike, I've got a proposition for you," Monroe said. The Pentagon is looking for consultants who can teach psychological operations to special forces units. Your civilian experience with countermanipulation has impressed some very senior people. Michael considered the offer while watching his children laugh with their friends. The teenager who had been coached to betray him was now a confident young woman heading to one of America's top universities. The boy who had been taught to lie about Michael's parenting was now a strong, honest young man who understood the value of loyalty and integrity. "I'm interested, Dave," Michael replied. "But my family comes first. Haley and Logan have learned what real strength looks like, and I want to make sure they continue to have that example." Michael ended the call and joined his children's celebration, reflecting on the complete transformation of his life. The people who had celebrated his destruction were now serving prison sentences or struggling with the permanent consequences of their criminal behavior. The children who had been taught to betray him were now his legal family, bound together by a shared understanding of the importance of honesty and loyalty. The celebration party 7 months ago had been intended to mark Michael's defeat. Tonight's graduation party marked the beginning of a family that had been forged through conflict and strengthened by victory. Michael Kincaid had not just survived his enemy's conspiracy. He had emerged stronger, wiser, and surrounded by people who understood that challenging him was a mistake that carried permanent consequences. His war was over, and his victory was absolute and irreversible. The children he had raised would carry forward the lessons they had learned about strength, loyalty, and the price of betrayal. Michael's legacy would be a family that understood the value of character and the consequences of crossing someone who had dedicated his life to protecting the things he loved. In the end, Michael's enemies had taught his family the most valuable lesson of all. There are people in the world who should never be underestimated, and Michael Kincaid was definitely one of them. That's the end of the story. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching.